Welcome to the Advances in Research and Innovation stream of SNOMED CT Expo 2024. My name is Alejandro López Osornio, and I'm a Senior Implementation Specialist at SNOMED International. I will be moderating today's session. All questions will be answered at the conclusion of the presentation. Online attendees, please use the Q&A button to type your questions to the presenter, and on-site attendees, please use the microphone provided in the room. I'm now pleased to introduce Guillermo Reynoso from SNOMED, who will be presenting evaluation of AI-assisted pre-translation for SNOMED CT, substrate selection, glossary management, post-processing, and fine-tuning of large language models with clinically validated content. Guillermo, please go ahead.
Thank you. Well, good morning. I usually like quick presentations. And I think the main idea is, yes, we are experimenting with many things, yes, but the benchmark is if you imagine how much time it will take for you to write down the translation of fracture of femur, for example, it will probably be a few seconds, yes. And if I tell you, well, I have an AI-assisted translation that is right 50% of the time, yes, you will say, well, and you will have to review it and distinguish which one. You will say, no, because, I mean, for easy things, I can, I can avoid doing this twice. What is called in woodworking, you say, measure twice, cut once. Yes. So we have to be sure that in a certain way is our benchmark. Yes, we cannot be more inefficient than that. So if I tell you, well, this method is right 50% of the time, or this method is right 70% of the time, yes, what will be the natural question? Give me, I will only use it when it is the 50% of the time that is 100% right, yes, in a certain way. You don't want to say, well, don't give me the garbage together with the right things. Yes, it's like when you go to a Korean barbecue restaurant and they say, well, I have a very tender beef, and I have a very, very spicy sauce. Yes, you say, well, bring them separate, and I will pick what I will be doing. Yes, so in a certain way, the quality of the method and our desperate need for finding better assistance for translations is about saying, well, we want to isolate and identify the highly probability of good translations and discard all the rest. For the rest, we prefer to do it by hand. Yes, we already have trained translators. So, and they are very, very demanding in terms of saying, don't give us garbage. Yes, we don't have time for that. So, we have started in 1995 with the translation of the Spanish edition. And over time, we will be 30 years next year. And over time, policies have changed, SNOMED has changed. We started with SNOMED 3, SNOMED RT, SNOMED CT, and so on. And the policies have changed a lot in the source. Yes, and the quality of the source has improved significantly in the last few years, but mostly for new content. Yes, it's quite difficult because of the size of the terminology to go back and fix or realign previous content with current editorial policies that may have clearer naming conventions. And more, I'll say, what we call in translation, the internationalization of the product. I mean, making a product in such a way that it is easy to localize. The early years, really, it was quite difficult to localize SNOMED. And we work with several translation projects. Common German, Common French with SNOMED International, and provide support through our managed services to several countries. The context then is that for many, many years, the shield or the proportion of good results and bad results has been mostly between 35 and 85% with different techniques. So And that's the reason we haven't really used it much, because for the 15 to 30 or 40% that is not good, it introduces a bias, because when the translator sees a translation, it may think, well, perhaps I will have done it differently, but this one is acceptable, yes? Or, yes, there is a need to remove an article, but it's not a bad translation, yes? So we want to avoid that bias, yes? Because we noted that doing that kind of approach will result in many deviations from our editorial guidelines, and will result in more expensive fixes later in the process. Yes. So our process, while I am discussing here many AI or computer-assisted approaches, the message is our core team is composed with 7 translators, all of them authoring level 2 certified years ago. Yes, so we value very much training, and that has created a very significant improvement in our translation, because all of them are aware of the editorial guidelines, all of them are aware are able to model complicated things. We have training sessions 3 times a week, and so all of them are modelers that devote some of their time to translation. So we don't want to ruin that model by just saying, well, I will give you something that perhaps you don't want or you don't need. However, the Spanish edition is a common edition, like common German, common French, you have common Spanish. And countries depend on that edition, have to publish, yes, their own localizations or their own extensions. So we have a problem where if we introduce too much offset between the generic Spanish edition and the English edition and the NRC edition, then we may end up with kind of obsolete translations or a gap in the updates. And in the last couple of years, with the introduction of frequent releases or monthly releases, and the increasing number of drug extensions, we need to be able to provide translations for new substances, new products, in a much shorter turnaround. So we need to be much more efficient than what we were several years ago. Sorry. So that is what is in a certain way pushing the Spanish edition team into find ways of being more efficient. We don't want to replace our approach. We want to eventually enable our team to improve 20 or 30% the efficiency of our work, yes? It's not that AI will replace a translator. What we are trying to do is a translator assisted by AI may replace a translator that is just doing the old ways, yes? And in this case, we will be discussing mostly pre-translation approaches, but obviously, this is, in the case of the Spanish edition, this is much more important for quality assurance, yes? And for example, in the Spanish edition, we use template-based or model-driven text generation, like the English edition for clinical drugs. But because of the length of the descriptions, we had to make several abbreviations when they were too long. Yes, and you say, well, how I find those abbreviations? Well, you generated them again, yes, and compare, and if you see that there is a deviation from the standard text generation, you find now that you can eventually progress to larger description lengths. So then our objective is to have some additional efficiency. We, in this last release, we are now able to publish the October Spanish edition in October, depending on the October 1st English edition, yes? That for a full edition, that it has to translate every new concept that has to review all the FSN changes and has to take a look of all the changes in editorial policies and so on, and define editorial policies, like, for example, the recent change of foreign body of liver to instead of foreign body in liver. Yes, those kind of things. Yes, the source sometimes is not good. Sometimes it is deteriorating. Sometimes it is improving. That should be isolated from our translation. We just do what we think is correct, and we will not say that we have a foreign body of liver. Yes, we don't need to follow the English edition. We need to represent the concept in our language. We are not translating the English. We are understanding the English to understand the concept, and then we represent that idea in Spanish. If it is not the same, or if it is not conforming to our editorial policies, then we just ignore it. This is a table we presented last year that essentially is listing the different stages of a translation project and the different challenges that you have along the journey. And in this case, we added another row at the bottom that is our current stage, where we need to make efficient, monthly deliveries of part of the translation, and being able to be as close as possible. Part of this is enabled by SNOMED International helping us by delivering the October 1st release in September 20. Yes, we have an informal 10 days that we are working with a pre-release version, and then we eventually adjust. So that's why we have 20 days, more or less, or 3 weeks, and we have to rush on those weeks because sometimes the change is quite significant, particularly if there were batch updates in the international edition. So that I will not get into the details. You can get the slides, but I think each one of you will be able to place your project in one of these slots. Very important, we use lexical template and model-based generation, text generation a lot, particularly for clinical drugs. It's almost impossible to do it by hand. Yeah. We use DeepL in certain cases. We have used Google Translate. We have used Bing. We have used My Memory. We have used everything that we thought we could help us. Most of them only helped for amusement purposes, like Feike said, and at some point in time. If you want to have some break and have humor, then you can use general translators, yes. But DeepL has really been much better, and when you use it through the API, you can define how you want to translate something, like you can feed it a glossary, and you can also provide additional context through the API, and so on. So what we usually do is we communicate, we take the content from SNOMED, ECL, or results. We limit them, the kind or the pattern. We send it through the API to DeepL. We get it. We post-process it if necessary to align with editorial guidelines. And then we do a dry run, show you a simulation. And if you like it, you pick strictly what is good and discard the rest. Yes, and that part that you pick then automatically goes into the SNOMED mode and creates a description and inactivates or activates things that you need, and then sends that into a revision workflow. Yes. You'll find as a spoiler that this approach that is simpler, that you can also use without tooling on the web, is something that is helpful, and you can try to on your own if that fits your purpose or not. But we have been trying more sophisticated options, particularly the large language models, and we are still not there. And we will discuss why. we don't really believe much on single concept computer-assisted translation, because again, if you have a simple concept, it is much easier to just translate it and say, well, it was translated by a physician or by a professional translator, it's done, and it goes into a fast-track revision, and that's all. And then, because when you are looking at individual concept translations, you usually see heterogeneous patterns. And while we have machine-readable editorial guidelines to provide context or provide help, it is still time-consuming. So here, if you get into this, you can choose to add one of the DeepL translations as a synonym or as a preferred term, and so on. But we don't really use this that much. It is only perhaps for beginner translations. And what we are focused is on isolating common patterns and translating them in batch so we can have some homogeneous selection. Yes, the key issue is selecting your battles, selecting what you are going to be translating and discard everything else that will get you 50-50 results. So here you will see some examples of inadequate translations. And so in this case, we just discard them. We ignore them, yes. We are not trying to take that translation and fix it because the cost of fixing is high and because that may introduce new mistakes, yes. Batch pre-translation, pick your battles. So previous work, again, by Faki, demonstrated that any approach to pre-translation is much better if you use sufficiently defined concepts. Yes, where the model is expressed, where you have explicit context for that. We have also found that single role group concepts are usually building blocks that are much easier to translate. If you don't have a role group and the concept is primitive, it means that there is no context. There is a meaning that is much more difficult to capture. If the concept has 2 or 3 role groups, then you get a composite concept, or have several concepts in one. If you have only one role group, most of the cases, it is a simple concept like fracture femur. Yes. And you can either use lexical templates, or in this case, using DeepL, you can use ECL to refine the set of concepts, the regular expressions, and say, well, what else I will filter? The key here is to filter, to only try to go for high probability translations. Let's try to identify the 40% that is good, instead of trying to do the 100% and from there having to pick the ones that are good, because that is certainly not efficient. Then prepare for the battles. Usually you have to feed the process, pre-feed the process with your glossaries, how you would like to translate something. So on the upper level of the slide, you will see translation into Spanish that is understandable. It may be even used in some countries, but it's not it's a kind of a literal translation. Yes, a borrowing, something that we not always say. So open fracture for us is translated in different way. Yes. So with glossaries, you can say, well, these patterns I want to translate this way. And the good part of it is that for countries that have inflection in terms of gender and number and so on, it is handled automatically. So that glossary entry works. And here what you see on the bottom is a better translation that is still not there. Yes, a better translation, and the blue part is the one that has been influenced by the glossary. Yes, so that's a way to influence it. And then usually you post-process it. Yes, so for example, I think in German it's the same, but in Spanish and I think in French also, we remove things that make it countable, yes, or some articles and so on. We try to represent the class and not an instance of the class. Yes, so we do those kind of corrections, and you can do post-processing and you get a good translation. In this case, if you have identified, I don't know, 700 concepts that have this pattern, and this renders fine, then you have 7 concepts that have been translated and go into the revision workflow. Yes, so that's why we are so selective in what we use it for. As I said before, you do simulations and get information about what descriptions will be created, what was the result, and then you approve some of them. We usually discard anything that is not very, very good. We don't want to get content depth, yes, to start having things that we need to correct later. So we only take what is good, and then we continue the process. Then the other point in filtering, in this case, is something that Frank mentioned, to use pivot translations. That means use other languages to try to test whether your translation is more or less consistent. Yes, so one approach is to say, well, I will only accept pre-translations where the back translation, I mean, translating from the target to the source, will reproduce the target. Yes, the source. Yes, so if I translate fracture femur into Spanish and then translate from Spanish to English again, and I can reproduce the fracture femur, you say, well, there is no significant shift in meaning. Do you believe it? No, you should not. Yes, so you translate it from English to French, and then from French into Spanish. And then if you have the same results, you are adding points to that translation. Yes, and then you can do it as complicated as possible, because the user doesn't know, because all of this is done through the API. Yes, so you can add as many conditions as you want. Yes, and you say, well, translate this into this, into that, do this. You obviously have to find good comparison languages, and there are several. For example, in Nordic countries, you have Swedish that is complete. You have many other options, and so you can use them to pivot and to test your translations and say, well, after doing this and ping pong, over all the translations, if it is still preserving the meaning, then I have a bit more trust, and we can talk. Yes, but if it is not, then you say, well, I want by all means to eliminate garbage. So here the point is pick your best arms for the battle. Yes, don't just stick to one of them. So in the case of clinical drugs, we use, like in the English edition, we use templates-based generation. Yes, and we were talking earlier this week that for generating the English equivalent for new clinical drugs in your project, you also use some international templates and so on, and that brings consistency, because to translate the clinical drugs, you have a lot of rules, but you even have to sort in alphabetical order the ingredients and so on. So it's a mess. Yes, 200 character mess to try to find the differences. So we have been using large language model, local. It seems intimidating, but it's not difficult, because you can create all of this using AI. Yes, you start refining this, and most of the code can be, at least for testing, can be done using ChatGPT or Claude or whatever other option you may prefer. So far, the results, at least with the 2 LLMs that we use, that were those that were optimized for translation tasks, are good, but still not good enough for for us. We still have too much garbage. And therefore, you say, well, we will just use some metrics to check what is the quality of this. And like it was discussed earlier this week by SNOMED, Lewenstein distance, blue score. There are many scores that will compare the machine translation with an authoritative reference human translation, and will tell you what's the score. But that is not optimized for very short sentences like in SNOMED. So you get really scores that are wild. Perhaps we can consolidate some of that, but really the scoring doesn't help. You can have a different case at the very beginning, and it is detecting, it is overshooting, yes. So really the scoring is not helping us much. In conclusion, both of those options are attractive when you are in the rush, and when you, in addition to translate new concepts, you have to deal with the change management every month in terms of change the FSNs, change preferred terms, and so on. Yes, and even if you don't translate FSNs, if a FSN has changed in the international edition, you better go and take a look, yes, and revise your translation. Yes, for translations that are new, at some point in time, you will have to get back and take a look at those changes. At the very beginning, that's not much of a problem. And so these are the conclusions. But why? Why we didn't get enough AI? And this is the last slide. This is the last slide. And first, well, it may be the methodology. We may need larger data sets. In this case, we selected the most homogeneous ones. For example, concepts, clinical findings that had the preferred term equal to the FSN. So you say, well, we have some theoretical assurance that the preferred term is not ambiguous because it's also the FSN. So you say, well, I have a bit more help with that. Perhaps we have to do very smaller domain-specific models and so on. Find better metrics to differentiate what's good and what's bad. Certainly, we will continue researching the process from the SNOMED International pilot. We certainly are interested in doing as much as context submission as possible through retrieval augmented techniques. But the last one, the red one, and that's my last point is, like Stefan said, we have a problem in the source sometimes, yes. And then if you say, well, we don't use eponyms in the translation, but the source still has eponyms, and then you train, the large language model with that, then you have you don't have what you're expecting. So I'll say the source, one of the discussions we had this week was one of the options for collaborative editing is to retrofit some of the improvements in the last few years in the English edition and into existing content, because we still have a lot of existing content that needs to be addressed. So the source is certainly a source of problems. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Guillermo. We have used the time of the questions for the presentation, but you have a nice topic to chat with Guillermo in the hallways and during coffee break. So thank you very much to everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. With that, we conclude this session. Online delegates, you can stay for the next presentation this stream.